Hello, everybody. Happy new moon, and thank you so much for being here at e-flux. My name is Kay. I get to work on e-flux Journal, and as part of that, it's an extreme pleasure to welcome the curator, writer, and art historian Elena Zaytseva, who's joining us from the UK, I believe. And although not here at the moment, also in absentia, the artist, researcher, filmmaker, and scholar Alex Anikina, and together they're co-editors of Cosmic Shift, Russian Contemporary Art Writing, which is a gorgeous universe of a book in every possible dimension of that word. And it's truly unparalleled, as it's the first collection of Russian contemporary art writing that's published outside of Russia. So tonight, Elena, who has also been the curator at the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow and also at the Pushkin House in London, will be presenting an evening based on the book, featuring a lecture by Boris Groys, a discussion between Zaytseva and Anton Vidokle, and finally a film by the co-editor Alex Anikina. So quickly, I just wanted to read a couple of the reviews of the book because they're deservedly glowing. Just a minute. Okay, so Peter Osborne wrote that cosmism is the lure when a revived mysticism is the order of the day. But this collection is more energetically eclectic than that. It provides a window into 3 generations of artists and critics, Soviet, post-Soviet, and today. And one more, although there are many others. Ekaterina Dego calls the book a fascinating collection of essays, full of stimulating paradoxes, which perfectly reflects the intensity of the debate on contemporary Russian art scene, as precarious in everyday life as it is majestic in its cosmic dreams. And so it's a book that I think everybody needs to, should, and would be lucky to read. Also, in an unfortunate cosmic twist of fate today, the shipment of volumes to this address weren't sent in time from University of Chicago Press, who's the distributor. But I would urge you to order them either directly from the publisher, who is Zed Books, based in the UK. They're a small independent publisher. Their website is zedbooks.net. The paperback is £20 there. And there's actually free shipping to the US on orders over $25. I'll let you do the math, but it looks good. And they actually have a sale right now on the e-publication and Kindle, which are £4. Again, you'll do the math. And it was actually a pleasure finding somehow the last copy that McNally Jackson's books had of the book today. So it's quite a rare item. Anyway, it's a delight. Thank you so much for being here. And please join me in welcoming Elena Zaytseva, Anton Vidokle, Alex Anikina in absentia, but with their film, and now Boris Groys. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad to contribute to the success of the book. My text in the book has nothing to do, I believe, with cosmism, but still the title is cosmic, and so I was asked to present something cosmic, and I will do that. And when we speak about a cosmic shift in Russian intellectual tradition of the 19th, 20th centuries, we mostly have in mind the Russian cosmism that had its starting point in the writings of Nikolai Fedorov. I will be speaking about these writings later. But if we try to further investigate the genealogy of Cosmism, we inevitably come to the time immediate after the French Revolution. Many post-revolutionary thinkers, such as Joseph de Maistre or Lamartine, were deeply shocked by the terror of revolution and saw the return of religion to be the only means to reunite and pacify the mankind. They believed that men need a mediator who could unite them beyond all their differences, and that only God can be such a mediator because God is transcendent to the world. But later, the new programs of the unification of the mankind began to emerge. One of them was the so-called positivist religion of humanity, proposed by Auguste Comte in 1851 in his book System of Positive Polity, with subtitle Treatise on Sociology, Instituting the Religion of Humanity. You see here a temple of the religion of humanity in Paris that is still functioning as a kind of church of humanity. So we have here a repetition of this idea that only religion can save mankind from terror and war and from terrible experience of French Revolution. But it should not be a traditional religion. It should be a new religion, a religion of the mankind. Now I would like to speak for a while about Comte, not only because through his work we can trace a genealogy of the notion of humanity, but also because Comte deeply influenced the Russian thought at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. The concept of a religion of humanity was revisited by some influential Russian writers before and after the October Revolution, and played a crucial role in the emergence of Russian Cosmism. Comte's treatise has an interesting story. Before having written the book on the positive polity, Comte was working on the system of positive knowledge. His positivist attitude was extremely consequential. He rejected everything transcendent and spiritual, accepted only things that were given to us through our empirical scientific experience. However, in the years 1844, 1846, he was in his late 40s at that time, something happened to him. He fell in love with Clotilde Devaux, who was around 30 years old. At this time, both of them were divorced, but their relationship remained platonic. Clotilde Devaux had fragile health and died in the year 1846. After her death, Comte started the process of deification of his beloved. The religion of the mankind was from the beginning the religion of Clotilde Devaux, in particular, a femininity in general, so it very much fits in many contemporary discourses. In his preface to the book on polity, Comte writes that he started to work on its main ideas already in the 1820s. He was already at that time thinking about religious teaching that could substitute monotheism. But only after his meeting with Clotilde Devaux, he really started the book. The main point of the book, Comte formulates in the following way. The real positivism meant the domination of sentiment, domination of feeling over the reason. Comte, of course, did not forget that Robespierre wanted to install the religion of reason and organize terror in the name of reason. So reason became for Comte associated with terror. To prevent such a perspective, and in accordance with his own experience of Platonic love, Comte envisions a society in which women practice spiritual leadership. The main, and actually the only day of celebration of this new feminist religion of love should be the day of Holy Clotilde, the Vaux. So, Comte writes that humanity can be considered a true religion because it implies the veneration of something that does undeniably exist, namely the humanity, and says that the individual never can exist alone. Individual, he or she, is always a part of the whole. It's over a part of our organism, humanity, and can only survive as part of humanity. In this sense, humanity is God in a certain way, but it is a material God, the God that can be experienced, and that is the difference of humanity from the traditional God. Now what you see on the image, it is Chapelle de l'Humanité in Paris. Well, it's a very small image of, of the interior of the church, but I show you the better image later. And it is, of course, the portrait of Clotilde de Vaux. And you have a kind of celebration there, so somebody lecturing or preaching in front of Clotilde de Vaux. It's also kind of small. But what is interesting about this church, this church, you see it here, or you don't? Now you see it. So, that is a church, positivist church of humanity. I was really in. Because this positivist religion of humanity was a state religion of Brazil for a certain time. And you can find churches of positivist churches everywhere in a country. And that, the Church of Humanity in Rio de Janeiro. And I visited this church a couple of times. And in my time as I was there, it was middle of 80s. 1980s, it looked like this image, yeah. And I went also at 12 at noon at Sunday, so in the time of the Holy Mass, and that was a time of preaching, and preaching against religion, yeah. There was not so much people sitting there, maybe 10, maybe more. A guy was preaching in French, so nobody understood him. I did, but not the people sitting there. And he was kind of structuralist, so it was everything about structuralism and Piaget and things like that. But what was interesting is that you can see on the left and right side the images of enemies of religion, like Socrates and so on, Voltaire. It is an entrance to the church, and you see the flag of Brazil, also with quotation on it from Comte. Unfortunately, this particular church collapsed here. The roof collapsed. So the only thing that remained in a kind of miraculous way is Clotilde de Vaux image. Everything else is collapsed. And also these sculpture images have collapsed. They are now collected, and you see also here the image of Auguste Comte. But what is relevant for me and for my lecture in general is these stairs, these steps leading to the church. So it begins with Mathematica, but actually Kant writes about it that it is a basic knowledge and it's a basic science, but basically irrelevant for us, especially irrelevant for our society. What is central, and that we're trying now to describe, what is central as a real basis of our society is astronomy. Everything else, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, it's not relevant. But astronomy is a basis of everything. And from astronomy, we go directly to the moral. Yeah, morality. And so we see that discourse of Kant's book on polity progress, its tone changes. The point of change is in a very interesting way the Kant's discussion of communism. Here, as Kant believes, the social sentiment, so he starts with social sentiment, and it's always feeling and sentiment, up to the point he comes to the idea of communism. And then he says, here sentiment goes too far and begins to undermine the social order that, as we already learned at that point, is based actually not on love, but on astronomy. In other words, the social order is based on the cosmic order. Kant reminds us that Newton has shown that we live under the same laws of gravitation under which the celestial bodies are moving. So as Kant says, for the sociocracy that he envisions, the first science is astronomy. He writes, and I quote, "It is well to remember sometimes and to regret the grave imperfection of an order which we cannot modify. And yet, no wise man would wish to set free from it, and to see human life not merely loosened from all restraints, but devoid of any fixed object. The craving for this desultory independence is but one of the extravagances of metaphysical self-conceit. The defects which abound in every department of human life should result in prompting us to modify the external order under its secondary aspects. Also, its fundamental laws are beyond the reach of our intervention. Even where our power is greatest, the initiative is not ours." That is written by Kant in the context of his critique of communism again. Indeed, Kant formulated an opposition between communism and astronomy. That is the central opposition of his book. Communism is a form of metaphysical self-delusion that ignores astronomy and the laws of gravitation. The radical social change is impossible because the social order is dictated by cosmic order, and the social hierarchies and movements, so the movement itself, initiative itself, are defined by the power of gravitation. This Kantian opposition between astronomy and communism is the actual starting point for the Russian cosmism. Kant was very popular in Russia at the time before 1917. In his novel Petersburg, Andrei Bely describes his hero having a vision. An old Mongol looks at him through the window and asks, "Kant or Kant? Kant or Kant?" Both authors were seen as propagating submission to the influence of the thinking itself, so Kantian thing, or to the cosmic laws. The second form of submission was experienced as the most degrading. One can see this reaction especially clearly in the book Religion and Socialism from 1999, written by Anatoly Lunacharsky, who later became the first Soviet Minister of Culture. In his work of 2 volumes, Lunacharsky tells us history of the world religions culminating in the cult religions of humanity. Like his friend and collaborator Alexander Bogdanov, Lunacharsky is a positivist. He is inspired by the work of Mach and Avenarius. However, Lunacharsky sees the main deficit of the cult-positivist religion precisely in its cosmism, he says. Here Lunacharsky manifests himself as a Nietzschean. He writes that the universe is not cosmic, not cosmos, but rather chaos. It is a place of the struggle for domination by different material forces. The world is cruel, he writes. It is a state of anarchy in which everyone should fight for oneself and can either win or lose. The celebration of Nietzschean, Dionysian chaos is of course characteristic not only from Lunacharsky, but also for the Russian avant-garde, for the futurists. That the so-called mystery opera Victory Over the Sun, written and staged by a Russian futurist in the year 1913, everyone participated who had a name in Russian futurist, celebrates imprisonment of the sun, collapse of the cosmic order, and kind of a cosmic night in which everything becomes possible. Here indeed the chaos reigns. The usual chains of cause and effect become torn apart, life becomes unpredictable. In this chaos, only strongmen, silachi, can survive, actually futurists themselves. And the opera ends with a promise that the strongman will live forever, the reign of chaos will never end. What does guarantee the fulfillment of this promise? Actually nothing. In his comments to Hegelian notion of history, Nietzsche criticized Hegel precisely for his attempts to find a guarantee for the historical success. Instead, Nietzsche said, one should concentrate on hopes and expectations, and not on possible disappointments and failure. He also writes at that point that if you write biographies of the important people, we should only describe the life up to the middle. So when they are full of optimism and energy, but everything connected with getting old and death should be ignored by biographies and history in general. The same figure one can find in the writings of George Sorel, and Lunacharsky specifically relates to this writing of Sorel. In his letter of Daniel Halevi, 1907, Sorel writes, I quote, "Men who are participating in a great social movement always picture their coming action as a battle in which their cause is certain to triumph. These contradictions, knowledge of which is so important for historians, I propose to call myths. The syndicalist general strike, the Marx revolution are such myths." End of quotation. Lunacharsky used the same figure as he tries to find a synthesis between Comte's tradition of humanity, a religion of humanity, Georges Sorel's notion of social myth, and Nietzschean Übermensch. Common to them is a conviction that the decision to act does not and should not be based on any external investigations or reasons or proofs. We speak here about the inner convictions, about the myth, religion, faith in one's own victory. But what is the victory of humanity? It is obviously its own survival, because humanity, being divine, has no goal beyond itself. And that is a point when Fedorov begins to intervene in this discussion and this conflict between communist vision of utopia and communist vision of revolution on one side, and the concept of eternal domination of the powers of gravitation and cosmic order on the other side. Actually, his writing is concentrated on trying to overcome precisely this opposition between social utopia and laws of astronomy. He names his project «Общее дело», which is translated into English, common task. But if you look at the other possible translation, then, for example, Greek translation of «Общее дело» would be liturgia. And interesting that liturgia was precisely common task in Greece. It didn't have this religious connotation that it has now. It was simply a system of common works that the citizens of Greek states undertook. The other is obviously in Latin is res publica. So we have this kind of aura or context of possible translations. But I will keep to the common task translation, standard translation. The project of the common task in summary consists in creation of the technological, social, and political conditions under which it would become possible to resurrect by technological means all the people who have lived in the historical past. Here further was reacting to an internal contradiction in the theories of the progress that dominated 9th century mankind. Namely, the future generations were supposed to enjoy the happier utopian future only at the price of cynical acceptance of an outrageous historical injustice, the exclusion of all previous generations from the realm of this future utopia. The progress thus functioned as an exploitation of the dead in favor of the living, and as an exploitation of those alive today in favor of those who will live later. But is it possible to think technology in terms that are different from the terms of historical progress? It's also a question that, of course, was formulated time and again by Frankfurter School, especially by Walter Benjamin, the question of weak messianism, he named that. So do we have an ability to compensate the previous generation for their efforts and sacrifices or not? Fedorov believes that a technology directed towards the past is possible and actually already exists. It is art. It is art technology, and especially technology used by the art museums. The museums do not punish the obsoleteness of the individual items by their removal and destruction. That the museum is fundamentally at odds with the progress. The museum loves its items, gives a promise to keep them for a potentially infinite time. Progress consists in replacing old things with new things. However, for Fedorov, progress is not dictated by the inner dynamic of technological development itself, but by the succession of generations using this technology. So it is possible to stop this generational progress, to turn one's own energy from the production of the children, of the new generation, to turn it back into resuscitation, and at least maintains of existence of the old generations. Indeed, the truly emancipated individual experiences oneself rather than an artwork that should be protected from decay and annihilation. Accordingly, the true technology is a technology of sustainability of human beings in the first place. Already Nietzsche said it's better to be an artwork as to be an artist, yeah? Because artist dies and artwork doesn't. The Christian immortality of the soul is replaced here by the immortality of things, bodies in the museum. And divine grace is replaced by curatorial decisions and the technology of museum preservation. All of the people living, all the people who have ever lived could be and should be resuscitated. However, the artificial immortality is a fragile immortality. It is not ontologically given, but merely technologically secured. But how can it be secured? The answer is obvious. Only when the whole cosmic space is put under the technological control. And that is precisely the point where the cosmism of the cosmist gets its central role. Cosmos is understood here not as given, not as a cosmos of the Greek antiquity that resists the powers of chaos. Rather, the cosmic space is interpreted as a huge factory, as a field of operations that had a goal to secure the life space for the current and resurrected generations. Here, the Fedorovian project of common task tries to think and act beyond the traditional opposition between order and chaos that I described before, that dominated the cosmic imagination of the 19th century, and even of the 20th century in a certain way. So it's not an opposition between chaos and order he speaks about, but a kind of new technological order that transcends both. In his text, Architecture and Astronomy, Fedorov writes in particular, and I quote, "Imagine now that the energy sent to the Earth by the sun, which presently scatters off into space, could instead be conducted onto the Earth and will drive solar light in its entirety to the planet. Imagine that the solar energy, once directed earthward, might alter the density of its new home, weaken the bonds of its gravity, that you see the central point. So the beginning of the whole process is struggle against gravity, giving rise in turn to the possibility of manipulating its celestial course through the heavens, rendering the planet Earth, in effect, a great electric bolt. No sooner will its creation have gazed up to the heaven than it will begin sailing the celestial seas with the sum total of the human race, rendered as captain, crew, and maintenance staff of this Earth ship." It's interesting that Earth, as a satellite, eternally circulate around the sun, begins to be really utopian and a utopian place, in place of utopia, after it turns itself into a ship moving freely through the cosmic space. As I read this passage, I thought about a relationship between ship and museum. Yes, the two metaphors. But in very interesting ways they are connected. If you ever read a famous text by Michel Foucault about heterotopia, as an example of heterotopias, he cites precisely museum and ship. So museum and ship have something in common, And that is precisely that the both are metaphors of utopia. The Fedorovian project influenced many Russian intellectuals and artists who became active after October Revolution. And then, at the end of my lecture, I will show you some example of the influence of Russian cosmism on Russian art after the October Revolution. I think you believe that it is an image it's a black square by Malevich, yeah, but it's obviously not. It is an appropriation of the black square of Malevich by Solomon Nikritin, former student of Hutemas, who began to be active in the middle of the 20s and began with series of operations of the black square. I show here two of them. Now, reading about black square of Malevich, you can find a lot of discussions about this image being a beginning of the self-reflective, autonomous artwork production, because black square does not represent anything beyond itself. And showing the square shows precisely what it actually is. In this sense, it becomes perfectly tautological and free of any kind of external object representation. But in fact, black square emerged precisely in the context of this opera, Victor Ava the Sun. So initially, black square represented precisely the blackness of the cosmic space. In this sense, remaining basically mimetic representational artwork. It only represented the abstract space, but representing the abstract space doesn't mean to be abstract in itself. That is why, for example, Malevich never said his art is abstract and always was against using this word in relationship to that. And now you see some kind of very strange object, obviously an artificial object that emerges in the black square, which is a blackness of the space, and shows how from the black square you can begin to investigate the possibility of a cosmic, of a new cosmic order. Now, if you look at the growth of Nikritin's images, you find a very consequential development of these ideas. But I moved to another artist, coming also from Hutemas. It is Gustav Klutzes. And you see this almost naive, but in a certain way very powerful combination between black square and black cosmic space, where black square looks like a kind of fragment of the cosmic blackness, or in other interpretation, something like a flag of a new cosmic era. And here's a good image of struggle against gravitation. It's actually in New York, obviously, but New York beyond gravitation, so that New York skyscraper can grow in all the directions. Yeah, not only in one direction as New York, but in all possible directions. And that was the idea of Klutzes, that we should build cities beyond gravitation, but they can grow in all the directions. And I end with a couple later images by Nikritin. One is a very Fedorovian image of observatory that is not the real observatory because it kind of grows into the cosmic space itself, yeah, and begin to absorb it. And the last one is image of resurrection. The image has a title, Resurrected Office Woman. You see that she has abacchia at that time. People use it for calculating, and her additional elegant leg. And she is always, and she is actually traveling in the heavens on a spaceship. I think one can interpret her as a proletarian Soviet Clotilde de Vaux. Thank you. That was it.
Does anybody have any questions for Boris Groys? Now's your time. Oh, yes.
If you could just clarify a little bit more about the tension with gravity, that whole dilemma.
Yeah, you know, from certain science-based mythologies like Kant and many others, 19th century and 20th century mythology, there was a feeling that gravitation is a power that connects people to the cosmic events, because it is the same force that regulates the relationship between planets and the satellites and suns and movement of humans, because movement of humans are also regulated and controlled by gravitation. The idea of unity between gravitation and social structure was in a very interesting way interpreted by German Romanticism. I didn't go in this direction, only speaking about French tradition, but if you look at Schelling and many others, they believed that love is gravitation and gravitation is love. They believe that planets are gravitating to each other because they love each other. And the same can be said about human beings that gravitate to each other because they love each other. So the idea that we are subjected, all of us, to a certain power. It can be power of gravitation, it can be power of electricity, it can be power of sexuality. that keeps us together. Keeps us together and excludes the possibility of autonomy and freedom. Even if you look at the beginnings, Plato, we find these figures in his state. I don't go into that, but it's obvious. So, this concept of anti-gravitational struggle was, of course, a kind of mythology, a modern mythology, avant-garde mythology, social mythology. And based on the concept of independence from any already existing powers that connect us to other objects, be it city, be it earth, be it society, be it family, be it whatever. Yeah? We have to lose, to deny all the already existing inscriptions into the existing order to be able to become free and to choose the inscription we want to choose. Yeah? So this moment of liberation, total liberation, was very central. Just not to explain, but just to maybe illustrate the idea. Malevich developed in the end of 20s, beginning of the 30s, the concept of architecture that consisted of a totally isolated apartment. Every apartment could lose itself from the whole building, be turned into a car and moving on the surface of the Earth, but then also fly into the cosmic space and traveling alone, totally isolated. And he said the real freedom is to go in the context, into the cosmic space, but not abandon your own studio. Yeah, and that is precisely what people saw as ideal form of communication with outer world.
I was wondering if you thought, if ultimately, we can now look back at the absurdity of thinking that, this looks like literal astrology in hindsight with Comte, but I was wondering if you believe that that any and all forms of rationalism, any variant of it, inevitably reduces to this kind of absurdity.
Yes, probably, yeah. But then the question is, what function the rationality actually has in our society? In a time of the French Revolution, in the time of the Enlightenment, we were very much involved into the religious worldview. And the rationality, so reason, was a way to connect us with our own evidences. Yeah, that starts with Descartes. Now, believe me, everybody at that time found the idea absolutely absurd. Yeah? Why should individual believe in some kind of very strange evidences of his or her own reason instead of following the general pattern of the society he's living in that is controlled by God? Yeah? After a certain point in time, the idea became familiar and doesn't seem to be absurd. Even if you really begin to think about it, rationality itself is total absurdity. Actually, Descartes himself said at the end of his life that he tried time and again remember the experience of rational evidence. I hesitate, or I think, as a B, whatever you translate it. And he said, I can never come back to it. Now I don't know why I thought it so evident. Yeah. So this was not there. So the evidence and belief in rationality was the beginning of becoming crazy. Yeah? And then the next step is, of course, when you begin to rely on your desires. Yeah? Now, if you have certain desires, and then people come to you and say, you have to renounce these desires because they are irrational. You can't say, well, but why? They are evident for me. Yeah? So, of course, we can argue in one direction or another, but at the moment that the individual began to establish its autonomy in the world through self-referential experience of evidence, the movement from rationality to desire, and that is precisely what we are speaking now about, was already predetermined. And that means that this critique is possible, but somehow ineffective. Yeah? It's not effective. If you come to somebody and say, you want it, but it's not rational to want it, it is maybe true or maybe not. But this denial of evidence of desire is inefficient.
Okay, one final question.
Do you think Fyodorov believed in the orderly resurrection of a select group of ancestors, or in the disorderly, chaotic resurrection of absolutely all predecessors and ancestors?
Yeah, I thought about that, and I think that if you have a museum of immortality, so museum, you have to put all the people to resurrect. Yeah, if you are curator of such a museum, you are pretty much under pressure because it's like curator today, yeah, you know. It's like curator of contemporary art museums. Everybody says they make their own kind of selection, and they select not the right kind of people, and their preferences are subjective, and they exert their power, and so on and so on. So there is always possibility of criticism. At least these possibilities become open. Yeah. So if you don't think about inclusion, it can be resurrection, but it begins with inclusion. Yeah. Inclusion of the further generations into the economy of your own desires, then you don't even open the discursive field in which that can be discussed. And I want to remind you that Walter Benjamin believes that such an inclusion is a revolution. Yeah. The revolution begins with the attempt to measure our own time through comparison to the desires, expectations, and hopes of the previous generation. And at the moment, we see it's not the case. Yeah, our time is not like previous generation expected it to be. then we have a good reason for change and revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here today at the front line of contemporary art theory. And thank you so much, Boris, for firstly contributing to our book and for this beautiful lecture. Actually, the text by Boris Groys was called The Truth of Art, the text that contributed to the book. And it's a very insightful text. The title of the book, Cosmic Shift, refers to two concepts that are explored in it, cosmism and communism. The both were parts of the global modernity and were referring itself to global project of emancipation in different ways. However, the both projects were developed within specific Russian historicity. And this complexity of being modern and not being modern, paraphrasing Bruno Latour, was the question that we attempt to explore by putting together this collection of texts. Saying we, I mean not only my co-editor Alex Anikina, whose film you will see later today, but also the collective of contributors. There are 32 of them, and each of them were giving us advices and giving us contacts and insights that hugely contributed to this book, which became a collective project and became like kind of art project rather than being just a book. The book is constructed in 5 parts. The first and the last ones address the notions of future. The first chapter looks at the philosophical and social political constructions of the future, such as cosmism and communism. They are past concepts of the future. The last chapter, written mostly by the authors of a younger generation, addresses the current moment of rethinking the human subject and its future. Anthropocene, automation, and post-humanity become the key words there. In between, there are chapters 2 and 3 that address the aesthetics and ethics inherited from the utopian past and the archive that becomes a charged place of collision between private and the public. The 4th chapter addresses the politics of the present time and the choices that the artists have to make now. Most of the texts are essays, often written in theory fiction format, but the last text of each chapter is purely creative writing, a film script, a short story, or a poem. And today we will be talking with Anton about his film script, which concludes the chapter 1. Now I would like to give a brief overview of the book, go through its chapters very, very quickly. The Center of Cosmic Energy by Ilya and Emilia Kabakov is a fiction theory essay in which the revolutionary claims for emancipation and domination over nature take a mystical twist, one borrowed from Russian cosmism. Here, rising and falling utopias are manipulated by a technology that uses the hidden forces of nature, namely the energy of the cosmos. This idea of an allusion to Nikolai Fedorov's theory of the philosophy of the common task, which along the Marxism were the dominant lenses for conceiving of social justice in the period preceding the Russian Revolution. The first chapter in this book begins with the conspicuous opening line of Manifesto by philosopher Katie Chukhrov. Recently, I understood clearly that art couldn't help but be communist. In Manifesto, Chukhrov explores the possibility to reactualize the notion of communism, if not as a political-economical system, then as an ethical category based on compassion, emancipation, and equality. Communism and cosmism as concepts are, in fact, deeply connected with regards to their attitudes to society and of labor. Russian cosmism has a long history, originating in the epoch of Enlightenment in Russia, and was driven in part as a reaction to the suffocating, conservative, and immensely oppressive regime of Tsarism. Fedorov's concept did not constitute a philosophic system per se, not least because it was developed outside the existing Western philosophical tradition. In his writing, Fedorov does not refer the works of Western philosophers. Since 1860s, however, his theory influenced many Russian philosophers, thinkers, and revolutionaries who were grounded in the Russian Christian tradition and for whom the materialism of Marxism was a point of rupture. George Young, an author of the book Russian Cosmists, quotes one of young revolutionaries who recollects his conversation with Nikolai Fedorov. "I don't understand what you're troubling yourself about. After all, you won't be able to give those for whom you are troubling yourself anything except material well-being, since you don't admit to any other well-being, but meanwhile working to obtain material well-being for others. You renounce it for yourself, and indeed are prepared even to sacrifice your life for the sake of this. But what if material well-being is no more important to those for whom you are troubling yourself than it is for you? To what end is it all your bother?" In the course of our conversation, I heard from Nikolai Fedorov that the so-called great principles of the Great French Revolution, freedom, equality, and brotherhood, are the product of extremely shallow thought, or even thoughtlessness. Since brotherhood cannot result from freedom to fulfill one's whims or from the envious desire for equality, only brotherhood leads to freedom, for brothers who love one another will not envy one brother who is elevated above others and will not try to lower him to their own level. And the brother who has raised himself above the others will try to bring all his brothers up to his level. For that reason, we must seek brotherhood first and not put it at the tail after freedom and equality, as did the proponents of freedom, equality, and brotherhood. We must seek brotherhood first, and the rest will follow. Here, Fedorov tackles a problem that many thinkers saw in communism, namely its materialism. It can be argued that placing people's material needs at the core of political struggle demands unselfishness and an abnegation of material needs from those who conduct the struggle. These are qualities rooted in Christian tradition. Nikolai Fedorov's cosmism attempted to solve this contradiction and solve it with understanding that accelerating technologies will reshape social life in the future. And Fedorov made an attempt to create a future philosophy for the time when technologies will be so advanced that they start to threaten the very existence of humanity. Interestingly, in the realization of space program, we can see influence of Fedorov's ideology of brotherhood in some unexpected way. The space program, the space program of the USSR was, of course, driven by state ideology and the Cold War, as rightly another contributor to the book, Vadim Zakharov, writes in his text commissioned to this volume. And actually, this text is a critique of the whole book. But when we look at the stories and lives of people who participated in space exploration for Russia, Yuri Gagarin, for example, we witness strong collective ethics and unconcern with material goods. There is an interesting episode described in the recent biography of Yuri Gagarin by Lev Danilkin. After his triumphant space journey, Gagarin was granted new house by Khrushchev. The plan was to build large houses for the cosmonauts in the Star City. Gagarin rejects the plan in favor of building a block of flats where all cosmonauts and their families could conduct communal and collective life. Like most Russian constructivist buildings of the 1920s, Cosmonauts Block was built around communal service units, a canteen, a laundry, a kindergarten. The cosmonauts and their families were, in fact, the very men from the future for whom constructivists' architectures of 1920s were creating their visionary projects. Architecture of the Soviet period is the subject of Andrei Monastyrsky's text, "VDNH is the capital of the world." We were the first who translated this text, which is iconic for Russian art, into English. In this work, Monastyrsky explores the Soviet collective mentality as inscribed in the symbolism of the architecture of VDNH, a large park of North Moscow, purpose-built by the Soviet government to exhibit socialist economic achievements. Monastyrsky's argument shifts between conflicting systems, different religions, dialectical materialism, post-Kantian critical philosophies, and histories. The leitmotif of the text is an opposition between cosmos and chaos that unravels while the protagonist moves around the park, contemplating the perspectives that change in front of him. On the photo, you see how the bull on the roof of a cattle husbandry pavilion moves towards the cupola of the Cosmos Pavilion as if it threatens it. The narrative of the whole text results in the conclusion that socialism, built in the Soviet social and political order, was an embodiment of classical German philosophy in its romantic, shamanic Hegelian version, and that socialism is simply an abstraction of capitalism towards its own absolute. It is an absolute spirit of capitalism, states Monastyrsky. This conclusion brings us back to the major dialectical contradiction of the concept of communism, which putting the material needs of the people first, cannot be free from the consumerist mindset of market and capitalism. Part 3 of the book is dedicated to the archive as the material evidence of the weight and flow of the historical time. It opens with the text by Vadim Zakharov. In his text I mentioned above, author Cosmos Archive, Zakharov considers the cosmos and communism as equally constitutive of the ideological machine of Soviet state, opposing them to archive, which is for him a domain of liberty and freedom. The text finishes with a short extract from the dictionary of the Moscow Conceptual School with the final words: "The crescent moon emerges from the mist, clutching a little knife in its fist." Everyone who grew in Soviet Union know this verse, "Вышел месяц из тумана, вынул ножик из кармана," which was very difficult to translate into English because it's got 3 important references, all of them specifically from Russian culture. It's absurdist poetry, Zaum, of the beginning of 20th century, the folklore of the Gulag, Soviet prison system, and somehow a mundane games of little children. In work by Maria Kapaeva, the mundane Soviet life turns into something formidable, uncanny, and daunting. Her work is based on a photographic archive belonging to her father, an amateur photographer. The quotidian life in these stories happens against the backdrop of images of the existing bigger world, represented by the pictures on the TV screen, which remarkably was the subject of some photographs. And photos of the Western pop stars on the bookshelves. Olga Chernyshova, another author of the book, established her strategy on research into methods of populist movements in Russia, in Russian art of the 19th century, the wanderers, передвижники. Cosmic Shift includes stills of her screens that incorporate video image with text. A strange row of humble characters and overlooked objects evoke an acute feeling of sharing the world with others and fragility of living and non-living beings. And yes, I wanted to read you this. Oh, sorry. I wanted to read you this text, but sorry, I haven't brought it with me. It's very touching text about the lion in Aleppo. How is the basalt lion doing? It stood on a hill in the open air on the road from Aleppo to Damascus. Below, a peasant was plowing terracotta land under grey olives. The lion was perfection. It would be the pride of any museum today, and around 4,000 years ago it graced in Hittite temple. It was magical. From far away it looked ferocious, but when you got close to it, the lion turned out to be one-eared and smiling. No one really looked after it, although there was an empty guard box in a distance from it. Clearly, the lion itself stood guard over those parts. I wouldn't want for its life, which is measured by millennia, to be over. No video camera is trained on the lion. I'm unable to click a button in the internet and find whether it's still intact. And in the same archive section is the text by Maria Sumnina, who is the daughter of Andrei Monastyrsky, and actually she is mentioned as a child in the text. Vdnh is the capital of the world. So she submitted the text about her own performance, in which he travels to the past. He travels actually to the same very site in Moscow, near Moscow, in the field near Moscow, where her father, then being a young artist, conducted the performance that became one of the classic works of Russian art of 20th century. And the final part of the book addresses the reconfiguration of the subject and its relation to the future. The profound transformation we are undergoing as human beings by means of automation, digital technology, gene engineering, and Anthropocene calls for a new post-Cartesian ethical framework to describe ourselves and our place in the world. The book closes with a short story by Pavel Pepperstein. Indeed, the skyscraper cleaner Pine Martin concludes both this part and the entire collection of the text. It addresses the radical changes that technology is bringing to subjectivity, blurring the line between human, non-human, and the divine. The story's protagonist is a cloned Pine Martin, genetically engineered to perform a specific role, that of taking care of dirt and waste in a very sophisticated structure that unites humans and other living creatures some 2,000 years from now. The element of contingency that accompanies complex and subtle technologies leads to an unpredictable chain of events that unexpectedly refer to the Russian religious discourse. This return to the religious at the end of this book is a completion of the circle, a return to the contradicting dialectics of the material and ideal within Russian contemporary art thought. So this is a short overview of the book. I wasn't be able to mention all authors because there are 32 of them. And now I would like to invite Anton, whose text, The Communist Revolution, was caused by the sun, finalizes the first chapter that is about cosmism and communism.
Thank you very much. Hello. Does the microphone? Oh, it works. Yeah. So the text is actually a script. It's a script for a film that was made a couple of years ago. And it's always kind of a bit risky to publish a script because the film is never really the same as a script, yeah? Because as you shoot something, there are a lot of unexpected things that happen, and it doesn't necessarily, or at least my films don't really follow the scripts literally. But it seems like it's also kind of a very interesting thing to publish, because in a sense a script is, it's like a kind of, let's say it's almost like a tool, yeah, and if you publish a script, maybe somebody else can make it a film. So there could be another film made by somebody else, which is different from the film that I made, yeah? Because it's, in a way, it's like, it's a kind of I don't know, it's almost like an instruction manual how to do something. But this particular film is about, well, vaguely about Alexander Chizhevsky, who was, let's say, a second-generation cosmist. He was a scientist, but not only a scientist, also a poet and a painter, and a theorist, maybe, let's say, in a certain sense, perhaps a kind of a philosopher. He was born in Kaluga, and when he was a child, he met Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who was, as probably many of you know, Tsiolkovsky was the, let's say, the inventor of the mathematics that are necessary for a spaceship to leave the orbit of this planet. So basically the entire, space program in the Soviet Union, but also in the United States, is largely based on Tsiolkovsky's sort of mathematical inventions and, but many other things. Basically what happened was Tsiolkovsky met Chizhevsky when Chizhevsky was very young. He was a teenager, I think he was 12 or 13, and Tsiolkovsky was really impressed with how precocious this little kid was. So he gave him a gift. He gave him a telescope, a small telescope, like a domestic, child-sized telescope. This was during the First World War, and basically Alexander Chizhevsky started observing the sun using this telescope. But at the same time, his father was a soldier. He was an officer. I think he was either a colonel or a general in the Russian Imperial Army fighting Germany. So he was kind of quite obsessed with two things: the events at the front, because he was really worried about his father, so he followed the news. And at the same time, he was observing activities on the surface of the sun, the coronal eruption, sunspots, all of this kind of amazing events that happens in the life of the sun. And at a certain point, he noticed that there seemed to be some kind of a strange correlation, that as the activity of the sun intensified, as the eruptions got stronger, or there were more sunspots, or they were bigger, the fighting intensified in the war, and there was more casualties, more violence, more sort of stronger battles, bigger battles. And that basically made him think that perhaps there is some kind of a strange correlation between the life of the sun, the physical sort of existence of the sun, and events on Earth, events, in human society and human history, So as basically when he entered the university, which was late, teens, in actually St. Petersburg, he even though he basically eventually became a scientist, a biophysicist, but actually at the university he was in the history department, and his dissertation or his research was kind of a very, very massive study of the relationship, historical relationship between the activity of the sun and human history. Because the sun is one of the most observed and studied objects that we have historically. All civilizations, from Egyptians to ancient China to Mesoamerica to Europe, medieval Europe, observed the sun and kept quite detailed chronicles of what actually happened with the sun. Of course, it's like the most transcendental object we ever see, in addition to the moon. So this is something that has fascinated humans since the very beginning. So basically he took these records for approximately 500 or 600 years and compared them, or did statistical analysis comparing them to the events in human history, to in all parts of the world. And the interesting thing about the sun is because it has been observed by most cultures located at different places in our planets, there is a very, very comprehensive record of what was observed, what happened, from what could be seen from which side. And we also have similar records for historical events, including revolutions, massive diseases, epidemics, economic cycles, booms and crashes, famines, and all sorts of calamities. But yeah, and at the end of this research, he published a book which basically suggests that yes, he found a distinct mathematical correlation between the activity of the sun and the activity in human society on this planet. And he also basically kind of devised an analysis of different sun cycles. Yeah, he basically he observed that in a century there's 11 cycles, and there is a kind of a very distinct, very formal waxing and waning in the activity of the sun, which corresponds to particular states in human society, ranging from a kind of depression or kind of a very, let's say, low, psychic sort of atmosphere to periods of like extreme activity, which he even calls like psychotic epidemics, because he almost saw it as a kind of a disease, like a contagious disease that is caused by emanations from the sun that is responsible for eruptions of inexplicable violence and all sorts of calamities on this planet. And basically this book was published and got quite a lot of attention. It was published in the 1920s. He was invited to lecture actually in New York at Columbia University. There are rumors which I have not been able to confirm in terms of the documents that he was nominated for a Nobel Prize, And actually Niels Bohr wanted him to be a fellow at his laboratory in Norway. So he was really somebody quite known at this point internationally. And apparently, and again, this is like some kind of unconfirmed story, but it's a really strange story and it's interesting, therefore I do not feel bad about sort of sharing it with you, that the Nobel Prize Committee contacted the Soviet government, as it is customary when they consider awarding somebody this prize. And actually, the Soviet government had a very kind of negative reaction to this news, because for them, what this book basically implied was that, if sun has this enormous, amazing effect on human society, on what actually happens, on all sorts of events, then perhaps that means that the communist revolution was a product of solar activity, rather than a product of class struggle, emancipation of the proletariat, and so forth. So it basically undermined a certain kind of dogma, which at that point was quite important. So he was immediately arrested and actually first sent to Siberia, to prison. And it's complex because he was like a kind of a very famous figure at this point, at least in the Soviet Union. People spoke about him as a kind of a Leonardo da Vinci of the Soviet Union, largely because also he was a poet. He was, let's say, he knew Mayakovsky. He was also a painter. He was kind of gifted in very many different sort of fields. And quite a popular figure. But so he was sent to this prison, and then from the prison he was sent to Kazakhstan, where at a certain point in 1940s and 50s, everybody knows about Gulag because of the famous book, but there was also a Karlag, which was kind of a whole network of labor camps in Kazakhstan, where a lot of political prisoners were exiled to, but also whole nations. Like, for example, when World War II started, immediately Soviet government thought that the ethnic Germans that lived in Russia at the time, which were originally invited by Peter the Great, and they settled in the Volga region, that they thought that they would become some kind of spies or provocateurs. Yeah, so basically the entire sort of ethnicity was arrested and sent to Kazakhstan, where they were kind of resettled in Karaganda, which is basically steppes where you cannot really grow anything. Yeah, there is absolutely no food. There is relatively little water. So it's basically like condemning somebody to death. Very fortunately, Kazakhs, the population of Kazakhstan, are very unusual people. It's a nomadic culture. They didn't really start building cities or kind of fixed population areas until quite late, like maybe 19th century actually. But there is something cultural which is extremely, extremely generous. So even though they had quite meager resources, mainly horses and horse milk and that kind of stuff, but somehow they basically saved millions and millions of people from starvation and quick death because of this forced resettlement programs and exiles and all of that. So in a way, Kazakhstan, and particularly the city where Chizhevsky was exiled to, which is called Karaganda, is a really peculiar place in many, many different ways. First of all, it's extremely isolated. There is not another town or city or a populated place for approximately 1,000 miles around it, which is one of the reasons why it became this kind of open-air labor camp, because even if you could escape from the camp, you could not escape the place because there was actually nowhere to go, nothing to eat, nothing to drink for 1,000 miles. Yeah, so you could not actually leave this place even if you were out of the prison. Yeah, but interestingly enough, as this very repressive period continued, so many scientists, artists, poets, people in the cultural field were either exiled there or sent to labor camps or prisons there, that at a certain point it had kind of unusual demographic for the Soviet Union. It had maybe one of the largest concentrations of intellectuals and people in the cultural field in the whole country. So in a way, like you could say that it was like a kind of a Paris of the Soviet Union, with the most advanced citizens, but at the same time it was basically a gigantic prison. And then, strangely enough, when the space program started, when Gagarin did his historic flight, Karaganda was the spaceport. So basically the flights would take off from Baikonur, which is another location in Kazakhstan, but they would land in Karaganda because it's, again, largely because it's surrounded by these steppes. And I think for cosmonauts, one of the most dangerous things is because the landing of the spacecraft is largely uncontrolled. So the worst thing that can happen is to land in water because you can drown, or to land sort of on the mountains or some kind of a really hard terrain. So the steppes around Karaganda were perfect because it was kind of a grassy field for thousands of kilometers, which was kind of a safe landing pad. But it's also incredibly ironic because, basically to go into space and be that kind of future human, let's say cosmos human, but then to actually return to a labor camp, to prison, it's a kind of a very strange symbolic thing, but Chizhevsky got kind of stuck there for quite a long time. When he was freed from prison and then the labor camp, he was not allowed to return to Moscow until quite late, until late 50s, early 60s. So he basically stayed there for 3 decades. But being a kind of a very unusual, very positive person, despite this kind of rather intense unfairness, of being politically prosecuted and basically, government completely severing any possibility of a scientific career, he somehow continued his research and his sort of scientific work, and even in the labor camp, somehow he managed to negotiate with the commandant of the camp to be able to carry on certain kinds of experiments in his prison cell. He was even assigned an assistant, which was another prisoner, a young mathematician, and he focused on the study of the movement of blood through the physics of the movement of blood through the human body, because it's actually quite a weird thing. For one thing, there is something like 60,000 miles of vessels in our body. 60,000 miles, yeah, of tiny, tiny, tiny vessels. And because of gravity, yeah, which is something Boris talked about, and also because we're kind of an electrical device at the same time, yeah, and quite strongly affected by static electricity, yeah, and magnetized. And the way static electricity works is like every step we take produces static electricity, yeah. So as we move around the surface of this planet, as we move through space, we basically, our electrical charge becomes more and more positive. Apparently, positive electrical charge is very, very bad for circulation because the vessels are so small that the red blood cells, you know, if the dominant electrical charge of the body is positive, there is a chance that the red blood cells get stuck and they don't move particularly well through our vessels, yeah? And apparently all, or 99% of human diseases that are not psychological, that are physiological, are somehow related to circulation, because when the blood is not able to reach extremities or any kind of organ or part of our body, this is immediately the part that gets ill, and then if it doesn't get better, eventually would die, yeah? So basically, Chizhevsky was kind of quite concerned about this, also largely because he was surrounded by prisoners, very many of them political prisoners, that were sentenced to hard labor in coal mines. The reason why Karaganda basically became a city and later became this kind of concentration of prisons and labor camps is that gigantic coal deposits were discovered there in 1920s. And basically, in a certain way, it was also kind of an energy center of the Soviet Union. But most of the extraction of coal was actually done by forced labor of political prisoners. And they were dying like flies. I think the average life expectancy was less than 8 or 9 years or something like that. So basically he devised these lamps, which are called Chizhevsky chandeliers, yeah, which are electrical devices. They produce an electrical field that changes the charge of molecules of air in the room from positive to negative, yeah? So basically, you know, even our breath produces positive electrical charge. So when we accumulate in a room like we do right now, for example, we're basically all poisoning each other, yeah? So his device was basically, it meant to kind of reverse the effects of this poisoning through positive electricity by changing the valence in the room to negative, yeah? And they were designed to be almost like some kind of sanatoriums. Like I've seen some drawings by him or somebody that was working with him from 1920s, where it really looks like a sanatorium type room with this kind of fixtures hanging from the ceiling, and then there are fountains of water, because apparently humidity and moisture and water somehow has a lot to do with electricity or electrical charge of oxygen. And then there were this kind of specially designed beds which look like chaise-longue or some kind of clinical beds where you kind of half recline, half sit, yeah. And basically all of these prisoners were supposed to be irradiated by this energy fields of these lamps to increase their lifespan, basically, to not die so quickly. So what we did, I mean, maybe the center of the film was an attempt to build one of these lamps, but build it maybe much larger than the original. The original devices were about, I don't know, about 3 or 4 feet in diameter, and they were supposed to be kind of clustered in a room. Like this room would maybe take 6 or 8 of them. But we wanted to experiment with a very large one. Yeah, ours was approximately 15 feet in diameter, which is apparently the biggest one ever constructed. And to do it, we actually, strangely enough, found the only kind of company or factory that is still actually fabricating them. which is a very strange place in Karaganda. It was started by kind of a typical, let's say, post-Soviet businessman who was a physics teacher during the Soviet Union, but then after the collapse of the Soviet Union became a kind of an impresario and became quite wealthy and quite decadent, and then at a certain point had a skiing accident and was hurt so badly that he thought he would never recover. And then as he was in the hospital, a nurse brought him one of these devices in his hospital room, and he recovered, and he kind of almost like developed a spiritual quest to continue developing this invention of Chizhevsky and to perfect it and to develop it further, make it more, modernize it somehow. So he basically bought a factory and a laboratory and converted it into a kind of a center where he collaborates with physicists, physicists and chemists and all sorts of scientists to kind of advance the development of this particular device, which he basically intends to be not so much for medical purposes, but something to clean the atmosphere. Yeah, because apparently one of the strange things that it also, one of the unexpected structure functions that it performs, it cleans air and it can somehow absorb carcinogenic particles more efficiently than just about any other existing device to clean up pollution. Yeah, so he basically is trying to convince the government of Kazakhstan to market this on an international scale, to be implemented by every factory in the world that burns coal or other fossil fuel, because this particular device has a potential to radically reduce carbon emission levels on the planet. And then as we kind of talked to him, I kind of asked him what is the horizon of this, because it didn't seem like he was doing it for economic reasons, because he was already quite wealthy. Yeah, and what he started to tell me was it kind of sounded like a painting of Bosch. Yeah, he said that basically what he thinks will happen is if he can convince government of Kazakhstan, which will convince all the other governments, to adopt this as a standard sort of device to be implemented on all industrial exhaust systems, then the climate of Earth will begin to change. Yeah, and basically all of the ancient plants and all of the ancient trees and this kind of things will actually, the spores will come back to life, yeah, and they will produce fruit that we have not seen in millennia, and the question of diet and eating and survival will be completely solved. We would not need to work anymore, yeah, but also climate will change in such a way that we would not need clothes anymore, so we will kind of all walk around naked and not work. I mean, it sounds like really, so basically this person is trying to produce paradise on Earth, yeah, but completely seriously, so there is a factory, they do all sorts of things there, and there are all sorts of visitors from, American chemical industries that come to learn about this process and stuff like that. So it's something very, very peculiar between amazing utopian fantasy, but also some kind of business, and also some kind of mysticism maybe, yeah. But basically they built this device for us, and in the film, basically at a certain point it's turned on, because we were quite curious what happens, yeah? And they were very nervous because it was so large that they immediately told us, well, you will have to turn off your cell phones and turn off your computers, because like the electrical field and the magnetic field must be enormous. And then we realized we're next to an airport, yeah? So then everybody got totally scared because we thought, okay, what if we affect the navigation system of the airplanes and people crash? So we had to time the turning on of this device between the flights, yeah, so that it doesn't really, and then we all kind of hid like out of sight, and then we turn it on and actually nothing happened, absolutely nothing, because the energy that it produces is completely invisible, there is no sound, there is absolutely no effect, yeah, and there was something extremely, extremely beautiful about the ephemeral nature of this, and all of our fears and expectations before. But the people that actually live in the village next to the place where we installed it, they were unbelievably positive about this. They were super curious. They were completely convinced that it has powerful rejuvenating functions, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to keep it permanently, because they thought that this could become a permanent source of income for the village, because they could charge people for a sort of health treatment by, you know, kind of exposing this to this irradiating health device. Which probably, I mean, I would have done it, but we already donated it to the local Museum of Technology, because they kind of realized suddenly that they don't have a monument to Alexander Chizhevsky, even though he lived there most of his life. So they thought that they would adopt this device as a kind of a functional monument to him, and we kind of already agreed to give it to them. So I think at this point it's at the Museum of Technology.
Very interesting thing that it is in the museum, because in one of his books, Boris Groys written that museum is actually a cemetery for the culture. So basically, instead of giving this lamp to the world to produce the paradise on the world, you buried it, you put it into the cemetery of the culture.
Yeah, maybe that would. But I think it would take thousands of the slams, or maybe millions of them. But it's quite interesting, because the guy that built it, he also, because all of the cosmonauts and astronauts are in Kazakhstan, and he's clearly quite well connected and stuff, so he wanted them to photograph the city from space to see the effect of this, to see if it's possible to record the effect of these devices from spaceships, yeah, because he thought that you would sort of see these domes of energy, yeah, or domes of like pollution-free oxygen, and in the end, like somehow either he was still working on it or it was not possible for some reason. But I was very, very curious to see if to see these images, yeah, because it's actually sounds quite interesting. Yeah.
This is such a wonderful story. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Maybe,
So what now? What do we do?
maybe we will open the floor to the questions,
Okay.
just few questions, and then we show the film, because we have to show the film by...
The film is not the film that I was talking about. It's a different film.
Yes, a different.
Just important note. Yeah.
It's a film by my co-editor, Alex Anikina. So, yes, please.
Chizhevsky conceptualized the solar eclipse in his philosophy of solar eclipses?
I think, I don't remember specifically reading about the eclipse in his writing. I think it probably wouldn't matter so much other than symbolically, yeah, because eclipse or no eclipse, you know, sun produces. Okay, it's more complex, yeah, because in a way, like his relationship to the sun is kind of, it's not only a scientific relationship, yeah. On the one hand, yes, it's empirical, it's scientific. This is something that he researched and investigated all his life. But on the other hand, in the very beginning, he was quite fascinated with Egyptian culture. And actually, before he became a scientist, he became an Egyptologist, yeah. And he was a kind of a, let's say, a sun worshiper, because Egypt had a very, ancient Egypt had a very unusual pharaoh, yeah, who basically, at a certain point, radically reorganized Egyptian religion, and basically got rid of all of the gods except for the sun, yeah, but not the sun in the way, not the sun in the sense of Ra, not the sun in the sense of how ancient Egyptians normally worship the sun, but he kind of understood something very contemporary, that the warmth that he feels on his face from this object that he intuitively understood is located incredibly far away, that this is some kind of an energy emitted by this object, yeah? So in fact, what he proposed to worship is not the sun, not the disk, yeah, but this energy, this generating, that affects everything on Earth, yeah? And he wrote a very beautiful poem, like an epic poem, which was a kind of like an ode to the sun, yeah, which is maybe one of the oldest, like, preserved Egyptian poems. So Chizhevsky actually translated it to Russian, yeah. So I think there was some kind of a very emotional, very personal relationship to the sun as a kind of a transcendental object that in many ways is responsible for life on Earth, yeah? And there is a kind of a very strange echo of this in Bataille, yeah, because if you read a Kercher, Bataille uses very clear language to basically credit the sun as the source of life, yeah? As it is refracted by the biosphere, by the atmosphere, as this energy is transformed into living, living matter, yeah? So there is some kind of like a very strange solar metaphysics that happens with Czyżewski, yeah? And somehow it parallels his scientific interest, and the two are very harmonious. They're not like in conflict somehow.
How shall we pass the mic? Shall I bring the microphone?
So the film that you were talking about, where can we find it? How can we see it? Is it possible? Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah. No, it's impossible. Yeah, it's impossible. It's screened sometimes. Yeah, I don't know when the next time it will be screened in New York will be, but it is not online. Yeah, So sorry. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's true. It's going to be shown at Vassar College, which is a bit outside of New York. Yeah, I think quite soon. But yeah, I can give you the date actually. Yeah, the 29th. Okay, it's on the 29th at Vassar College. Yeah.
There was another question somewhere.
Oh wait, did somebody else? Okay. I was wondering. It was a thought that sort of came very, very quickly, very suddenly, but. We tend to, with people like Comte and such from the previous lecture, the rationalism sort of attributed to the universalism of Christianity and monotheism. But what you're describing here, what you and others have been describing here, seems to be almost pagan. And I'm wondering if you noted any kind of tension between paganism and monotheism in the very edifice of modernism.
Well, actually, it's a really good question. So there are many different trajectories I could answer this. One would be that, Russia is like a pagan place, yeah? I mean, this is the deeply pagan, yeah, historically. But on the other hand, like the solar thing, this is totally what I failed to mention about this Egyptian pharaoh that invented this religion of the energy of the sun. It was the first monotheistic religion. It's actually older than Judaism, yeah? So in a way, like, this has never happened in human history before him, yeah, that somebody would worship just one god, yeah, but his god was like particularly ephemeral, yeah. So I don't know actually if I'm answering your question, but there is clearly some kind of a very complex relationship between monotheism and polytheism, yeah. And with cosmism, it's very important, but I cannot articulate right now, at least, or authoritatively say, or establish a relationship to it, yeah, except that they play quite significant roles, yeah. Maybe Boris would like to answer. I can see that Boris would like to say something.
Just maybe one remark. So classical Christianity, Judaism, were beliefs in a transcendent God. So God outside of the sphere of human existence. Human had kind of external relationship to God and not internal relationship. Not immersive relationship, if you want. And yes, already Kant says, I'm against transcendent God. Yeah. So what the people try to do is to create a mythology, a religion that would include the human being as part of the universe. And that starts very early and goes up to Heidegger's being in the world. Yeah, being in the world as a basic condition that does not allow us to go outside of the world, that compels us to define all our relationship as relationship inside the world. And so sun is also inside the world. Yeah, sun is maybe monotheistic, but it's not transcendent. It is something that allows us to establish a kind of sensual relationship to it. So it is inside the universe and outside it.
Thank you. So if you don't have any questions, any more questions, maybe we will watch the film by the co-editor of the book, Alex Anikina. And it's basically a film about complexity of flow in time, about personal time, how it coincides with historical time and cosmic time, all three totally different types of time. So how to turn it on?
Этимология слов просачивается сквозь время. Слова создают другие связи, параллельно историческим. Также тянутся сквозь время слова из моей собственной истории. Пускают корни. Моя история, как и другие, втиснута в историю с большой буквы, в тяжесть веков, так сказать. В столкновении с прошлым необходимо признать, что его кажущаяся близость не более чем иллюзия. В свете этой иллюзии в информационном поле появляются другие очертания — черти. Знание чертей не освобождает от замеров глубины омута. И если уж залезать в мифотворчество, мне бы хотелось задуматься о двух направлениях. Снизу вверх, как растет дерево, и сверху вниз, как падает метеорит. Посередине этих двух мифологем на земной тверди стоит дом. Это дом, который построил мой прадедушка Ермил в 1918 году в деревне Чичево. Чичево находится в области, ранее называвшейся Гуслицами, районом старообрядчества. Дом был поставлен на месте более старого домика, подаренного Ермилу его отцом Данилой. Когда я смотрю на старые фотографии, деревянные дома проглядывают за спинами и улыбающимися лицами, всегда на заднем плане, всегда мимолетом. Можно думать о том, как теплая материя дерева принимает форму дома. А можно представить древо как прорастающую структуру данных, генеалогическое в том числе. В обоих случаях прорастание происходит в саму жизнь. В 1935 году у Ермила и Прасковьи, его жены, родился Анатолий, мой дедушка. Родился в этом же доме. Горница с беленым потолком и стенами сохранена практически в том же виде. Там, где сейчас сад и грядки, был двор, широкое крыльцо, где накрывали на стол, сарай, козы и курицы. В июле 2017-го, столетия спустя после постройки дома, я читаю фольклориста Владимира Проппа в саду, выписывая цитаты. Итак, избушка Бабы-Яги, а также и другие дома в лесу – это антидома. Они не противопоставлены лесу, они его часть, причем зачастую самая опасная. Поэтому противопоставление лес-дом в волшебной сказке имеет смысл только по отношению к крестьянской избе героя. В целом же лес противопоставляется саду. Это противопоставление возникает уже на уровне лексики. Темный дремучий лес, чудесный сад. Лес связан с миром мертвых, сад с миром живых. Недаром в нем часто находятся молодильные яблоки и живая вода. Вместе с тем сад – это освоенный лес. Поэтому отмеченные выше сопоставления, характерные для леса, остаются актуальными и для сада, но приобретают противоположные значения. Сад оказывается как бы зеркальным отражением леса. Лес и мир мертвых в моем воображении смешиваются с ночным небом и следами комет. Я ложусь спать в горнице. Беленый потолок отражает тусклые блики сквозь кружевные занавески. Мне снится, как падает метеорит. Кажется, что падает он невыносимо медленно. Медленно входит в атмосферу Земли. Медленно загорается под трением воздуха. Медленно падает на лес. Сон обрывается перед тем, как он достигает земли.
Пугающая информация от неопознанных американских ученых. Планете грозит катастрофа. Конец света назначен на 12 октября. Некий космический объект, который на огромной скорости уже несется к Земле, пробьет в атмосфере гигантскую дыру и уничтожит все живое.
В эти минуты на большой скорости к нам летит огромный астероид.
В НАСА сегодня напугали. К Земле приближается новый астероид.
Огромный астероид, он почти в 20 раз больше челябинского метеорита. У британских уфологов плохая новость для человечества. Астрономы обнаружили гигантскую планету, которая с огромной скоростью сближается с Землей.
Современные медиа тоже в каком-то роде продолжают традиции народных сказаний и песен. Пока деревянный дом выстаивает исторические бури, Космическая природа напоминает о себе. Падение метеорита – это символ катастрофического сознания, сложившегося не только под влиянием христианской традиции, но и более просто как способ заполнения пустеющего мифологического пространства. Неизбежность этого повторяющегося падения в решетке истории создает дополнительную вертикаль. Метеорит падал, падает и будет падать. Точно так же события, подобные друг другу, собирают ленту времени в гармошку. Упавший в 2013 году Челябинский метеорит передает привет упавшему в 1908 году Тунгусскому. Свидетельства очевидцев, собранные с 1908 по 1920, вторят записям с авторегистраторов, выложенных на YouTube. На фоне космических проявлений природы понятие времени и конечности начинает мутировать.
Вот всяких много гипотез о сотворении, вернее, о возникновении, большой взрыв, о возникновении всех галактик и так далее, что это большой взрыв. А с другой стороны идет расширение Вселенной, вот сейчас доказывают, это доказывается инфракрасным излучением. Легко смотрит на звезду. Звезда уходит, и постепенно она остывает, дает длину волны, большую, чем перед этим было. Это значит, что энергия за счет вот этой работы против сил гравитационного притяжения теряется энергия всей сферы вокруг каждой звезды и так далее. То есть в конечном итоге все идет в одном направлении, а именно в направлении начала и обязательно конец.
Но время материи не соответствует нарративному. В сказке существует сложное время. Мифологемы направлены на будущее восприятие. Такие же манипуляции происходят, например, в советской научной фантастике 30-х годов. Вперед направленное время фантастических историй как нельзя лучше подходит для того, чтобы вживить в массовое сознание будущность. В 1965-м братья Стругацкие пишут научно-фантастическую повесть «Понедельник начинается в субботу», действие которой происходит в научно-исследовательском институте чародейства и волшебства. Главные герои повести выдвигают теорию контрамоции, движение во времени назад. Что же произошло 30 июня 1908 года в районе Подкаменной Тунгуски? Примерно в середине июля того же года в околосолнечное пространство вторгся корабль пришельцев. Но это не были простые и безыскусные пришельцы фантастических романов. Это были контрамоты, товарищи. Люди, прибывшие в наш мир из другой вселенной, где время течет навстречу нашему. В результате взаимодействия противоположных потоков времени они из обыкновенных контрамотов, воспринимающих нашу вселенную как фильм, пущенный наоборот, превратились в контрамотов дискретного типа. Если предположить для простоты, что единичный цикл был у них равен земным суткам, то существование их, с нашей точки зрения, выглядело бы так. В течение, скажем, 1 июля они живут, работают и питаются совершенно как мы. Однако ровно, скажем, в полночь они вместе со своим оборудованием переходят не во 2 июля, как это делаем мы, простые смертные, а в самое начало 30 июня, то есть не на мгновение вперед, а на 2 суток назад, если рассуждать с нашей точки зрения. Кроме того, находясь над Землей 1 июля в нашем счете времени, они обнаружили в самом центре гигантского евразийского материка мощный пожар, дым которого они наблюдали в могучие телескопы и раньше, 2, 3 и так далее июля в нашем счете времени. Катаклизм и сам по себе заинтересовал их, Однако научное их любопытство было окончательно распылено, когда утром 30 июня, в нашем счете времени, они заметили, что никакого пожара нет и в помине, а под кораблем расстилается спокойное зеленое море тайги. Заинтригованный капитан приказал посадку в том самом центре, где он вчера, в его счете времени, своими глазами наблюдал эпицентр огненной катастрофы. Дальше пошло, как полагается. Защелкали тумблеры, замерцали экраны, загремели планетарные двигатели, в которых взрывался как гамма-плазмоид, или, скажем, мю-дельта-ионопласт. Корабль, окутанный пламенем, рухнул в тайгу и, естественно, зажег ее. Именно эту картину и наблюдали крестьяне села Карелинского и другие люди, вошедшие впоследствии в историю как очевидцы. В локальной космологии Краеведческого музея комната с реконструкцией старообрядческого быта становится колыбелью времени. 5 комнат расположены вокруг центрального зала. Музей располагается в бывшем здании школы села Степановка. На стене на карте Чичева отмечена крохотной точкой на другой стороне гуслиц. Отдельно расположена комната истории края и орудий труда. В центре комнаты стоит постав. Именно этим словом перевели на русский язык обрамление природы техникой в знаменитом эссе Мартина Хайдеггера. Технологическое сплетение, однако, как предлагает философ и переводчик Хайдеггера Владимир Бибихин, может начинаться именно с дерева. Дерево, напоминающее о негеометрическом пространстве леса, лесной амехании и одновременно источник огня, энергии и крова, становится призмой, через которую можно увидеть неразрывность сплетения материала с функцией, которая скрывает его истинную суть. Моя фамилия происходит от легенды об Анике-воине, русском богатыре, поспорившем со смертью и проигравшем. Аника-воин встречает смерть посреди чистого поля. Пригрозив ей сначала, богатырь отшатывается, узнав, кто его противник, и начинает просить отсрочки. Но Аника не может убежать от судьбы. Неизбежность материального времени, медленная катастрофа бытия, становится мотором, влекущим историю вперед. Прогнившие части деревянных домов со временем замещаются, как корабль Тесея. Но деревянный дом продолжает упорствовать во времени. Также упорствует и ангел на этом разрушенном доме в Коломне, городе в часе езды от Чичева, где родились мой брат и я. Где нам видится цепь событий, там он видит одну единственную катастрофу, которая беспрерывно громоздит обломки на обломки и бросает их ему под ноги. Ангел, может, и хотел бы остаться, разбудить мертвых и восстановить разрушенное. Но из рая дует ураганный ветер, который поймал его крылья с такой силой, что ангел уже не может их сложить. Этот ураган неудержимо несет его в будущее, к которому он обращен спиной, в то время как гора обломков перед ним растет в небо.
Общая форма – форма усеченной пирамиды с равноубывающими ступенями. Главная идея – мавзолей трибуна.
На сельском кладбище, как мне сказали бабушка и дедушка, не закрывают калитки, чтобы души усопших не чувствовали себя взаперти. Родственные семьи лежат недалеко друг от друга, между берез. Приверженцы русского космизма взывали к расширению привычного пространства обитания за пределы планеты, поставив науку на службу этого общего дела. В трудах Николая Федорова основой общего дела выступает родство. В качестве венца нравственной эволюции человечество должно преодолеть смерть. Воскрешение предков – посильная задача в том случае, если стирается разница между настоящим, прошлым и будущим. Космос становится новым домом. Понятие дома расширяется в бесконечность. Так же, как деревенский дом вплетался в природный ландшафт, в узлы и излучины рек, в зеркала озер, в палаты лесов, так же природа превратится в последний шум, потеряв вымышленную границу с космосом, с технологией и человеком.
But thank you so much for coming today to celebrate our book. And thank you so much, Boris. It was such a delight to listen to your lecture. So thank you.
So thank you so much, Elena, and Boris, Anton, and Alex. I think that, well, tonight, or last night was the new moon, and I guess it's a time for sowing seeds that will come into fruition later in the full moon. And I think that the seeds for further discussion on contemporary Russian art writing and cosmism have been really generatively and beautifully sown by all of you this evening and by everybody's presence here. So please check out the book. We have copies you can look at in the back, and then you know how to order it. A couple other humble suggestions just very quickly to further continue the conversation. There is a book recently published with e-flux and Sternberg called Art Without Death, Conversations on Russian Cosmism, we have in the back. And then February 1st, we'll have a e-flux journal issue on Russian cosmism. And soon from MIT Press, we're very excited to have a book coming edited by Boris Groys, Russian cosmism. So stay tuned. And thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.